exile to the remote island of St. Helena. It was, on the surface, the ultimate downfall of a man who once held Europe in his grip. But to truly understand Napoleon's legacy, one must look beyond the battlefield. Despite his military defeat, Napoleon remains one of the most influential figures in modern history. In many ways, he won in defeat. Napoleon was more than a general. He was a reformer, a visionary, and a symbol. While he lost his empire, he succeeded in embedding his ideals and institutions deep into the fabric of European and global society. His impact is found not just in museums and textbooks, but in modern legal systems, administrative structures, and national identities. First, consider the concept of legacy itself. Legacy is not about holding power, it's about leaving a lasting impact. Napoleon's fall did not erase the reforms he implemented. In fact, many of them outlived him. Even after the restoration of monarchies across Europe, his institutions remained because they worked. They brought order, efficiency, and modernity. One of the most enduring symbols of his reformist legacy is the Napoleonic Code. Enacted in 1804, it represented a seismic shift from the fragmented and often arbitrary laws that previously governed France and many of its territories. It introduced clarity, uniformity, and accessibility to law, emphasizing principles like equality before the law, the secular nature of the state, and the sanctity of property rights. Today, variations of this civil code influence legal systems in countries across Europe, Latin America, and even parts of the Middle East and Africa. Then there's Napoleon's role in shaping modern governance. His establishment of a centralized, merit-based bureaucracy broke away from the feudal and aristocratic privileges of the old regimes. Through his reforms in administration, finance, and education, Napoleon laid the foundations of the modern state. He created institutions that outlasted his reign. The Bank of France, the system of lycées, public secondary schools, and a tax system that provided consistent revenue for public infrastructure. Even in military defeat, Napoleon inspired a sense of identity and nationalism among the people he once ruled or conquered. Paradoxically, the resistance he provoked gave birth to national consciousness in places like Germany, Italy, and Spain. His campaigns disrupted the status quo, forcing fragmented territories to unite in opposition. This, in turn, laid the groundwork for 19th-century movements of national unification and independence. Culturally, Napoleon became a myth. Romanticized by artists and writers, his life became a symbol of ambition, courage, and the tragic hero. The image of the self-made emperor, rising from obscurity in Corsica to dominate a continent, resonated deeply in the collective imagination of Europe. Even his exile and death became part of the legend. A fallen titan, unjustly cast out by the monarchies he once challenged. Napoleon also transformed warfare and military strategy. His innovations in organization, mobility, and logistics became standard in modern military doctrine. His emphasis on rapid movement, centralized command, and morale remains studied in military academies around the world. Though ultimately outmaneuvered in his final battles, his earlier campaigns, Austerlitz, Ulm, and Jena, are still hailed as masterpieces of strategic genius. On a global scale, Napoleon's actions indirectly influenced revolutions and reforms far beyond Europe. His invasion of Spain destabilized the Spanish Empire, giving Latin American colonies an opening to fight for independence. Figures like Simón Bolívar were directly inspired by Napoleonic ideals of liberty and self-rule. Even in defeat, Napoleon's ripple effect crossed oceans. Moreover, the Congress of Vienna, convened to undo the Napoleonic order, inadvertently preserved aspects of it. While European powers aimed to restore monarchy and suppress revolution, they had to accommodate some of the structural changes Napoleon introduced. The balance of power system created at Vienna was, in many ways, a reaction to Napoleon's disruption. But it also acknowledged that Europe could not simply return to its pre-revolutionary state. Napoleon's personal philosophy also played a role in shaping modern leadership. He embodied the Enlightenment ideal of the rational, self-made man who governs not by divine right but through talent and achievement. While his reign had authoritarian traits, his meritocratic approach contrasted sharply with the nepotism and hereditary rule that preceded him. This shift in leadership ideals continues to influence political thought to this day. Lastly, perhaps the most telling sign of Napoleon's posthumous victory is how his memory has been preserved. No other defeated leader has maintained such a powerful legacy. Statues, books, films, and even entire academic fields are dedicated to studying his life and impact. He is remembered not just as a conqueror, but as a creator, a builder of systems, laws, and institutions. In conclusion, Napoleon may have lost his empire, but he won something greater: historical immortality. His ideas continue to live on in the structures of modern governance, the rule of law, the principle of merit, and the spirit of national identity. Defeat on the battlefield did not diminish his influence. Instead, it cast him in a different light. Not as a fallen emperor, but as a transformative figure whose vision helped shape the modern world. That is how Napoleon won, even after he lost. 2. The Napoleonic Code. Foundation of modern law. When Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in France, he did not merely seek to conquer lands. He sought to reform and rebuild a fragmented nation. One of his most revolutionary and enduring contributions was the creation of the Napoleonic Code. Officially known as the Code Civil de France, enacted in 1804. More than just a legal document. Before the Napoleonic Code, France was a legal patchwork of feudal customs, church law, and regional statutes. Justice was inconsistent, laws were opaque. He assembled a commission of legal scholars and practitioners to draft a civil code based on the principles of clarity, accessibility, and equality before the law. The Napoleonic Code was groundbreaking in several ways. First, it codified civil law into a written, organized, and accessible format. This made the law understandable and predictable for the average citizen, not just the elite or clergy. It eliminated feudal privileges and codified the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and secular governance. Key principles enshrined in the code included equality of all male citizens before the law, regardless of birth or status. Protection of private property as a fundamental right. The secular character of the state, separating church and law. Civil marriage and divorce regulations based on individual rights, not religious doctrine. A structured legal process that emphasized due process and fairness. While the code was progressive in many aspects, it also reflected the gender norms of its time. Women had limited rights under the Napoleonic Code, particularly in matters of marriage and property. Despite this, the code represented a major shift away from arbitrary and unequal systems of justice. The influence of the Napoleonic Code quickly spread beyond France. As Napoleon expanded his empire across Europe, he imposed the code in the territories he conquered. From the Netherlands to Italy, from parts of Germany to Poland. In these lands, it replaced archaic legal systems and introduced a uniform structure based on reason and legal equality. Even after Napoleon's fall, the code endured. Many nations retained it voluntarily, recognizing its clarity and effectiveness. Its impact was especially profound in continental Europe and Latin America, where newly independent nations often adopted it as a foundation. Ironically, Civilian populations actively resisted a foreign invader. Interior. Forms he state, which played a vital role in drafting and educational standards across the nation. Lives Napoleon himself. Influence Galent Hugo grappled with the themes of liberty, tyranny, and the human positioned himself as a defender of its ideals, liberty,